welcome, one and all, to Impolite Company on the WGCPR.live network. This is actually pretty exciting. This is the beginning of my second season for this. I did a whole year last year, and we're starting off with season two here. So in Impolite Company, if I could say the name, we defy the old adage and dive headfirst into religion and politics. You know, those things you're not supposed to talk about in polite company. I'm your host, Matthew Best, here to walk with everyone in honest dialogue and showcase the power of seeing the humanity of people with different perspectives. If you're listening, you can send me questions, comments at contactimpolitecompany@gmail.com. And you can find previous episodes on popular podcasts like iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. You can find us on YouTube. Just look for the Impolite Company logo on that's behind us here. You can dive further into topics that we talk about by going to my blog, which is pastormatthewbest.com. And if you enjoy what we're doing, you want to support it, you can do that through buymeacoffee.com/Impolite Company. Before we dive into today's episode, I always do this. I talk about a couple of things that I really care about. The first is if you want to show some love to Christ Lutheran Church here in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, in the heart of Allison Hill. It's a church that I serve as the pastor. I'm also the executive director of the health ministries. What makes this place so special is that we host three free health clinics. And since 2018, there have been over 100,000 visits, which is a huge impact. And we certainly always are looking for the supportive community. We don't receive any type of federal or state money, so we survive on donations. So if you want to do that, christharrisburg.org/donate. If you care about homelessness, you can check out the Memorial Blanket Project. And each year, people make blankets for complete strangers. We've had people make them from such great distances. Last year, we had somebody from Australia make a blanket and send it in. It's really powerful. Those blankets are put on display, different locations, and then they're handed out at the end of the night. We've done that in a variety of places: Carlisle, Pennsylvania, front lawn, west lawn of the U.S. Capitol, on the steps of the Pennsylvania Capitol. Last year, we were in front of the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia. This year, we're going to Denver, Colorado. So you can find out more at memorialblanket.org. And lastly, if you're looking for a tool to help you with difficult conversation around gun violence, I recommend American Roulette. It's a fiction book. I'm one of the authors of it. It follows the lives of 8 characters over the course of one day until the event happens. We offer no solutions. The point is to focus on the humanity in there, the part that's really missing in so much of the conversation around gun violence. We get locked up in an abstract debate and we lose sight of the humanity. Every penny of any type of what would be profit goes to organizations that address gun violence. And so the authors, this is just a loving act that we did. So today, I'm really excited and pleased to welcome Shailly Gupta Barnes, who is the Policy and Research Director of the Kairos Center and the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. She has a background in law, economics, and human rights, and has been working with and for poor and low-income communities for nearly 20 years. Her most recent report, A Matter of Survival, offers a model for organizing projects of survival to both meet material needs and build long-term political power. Shailly, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Reverend Matt, for inviting me here and for just in the space.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, thank you so much. So I want to give a little bit of some time also to tell us, the Kairos Center may not be familiar to folks. So maybe if you could say a little bit about what is the Kairos Center? What do you all do?
Sure. The Kairos Center is, well, our full name is the Kairos Center for Religions, Rights, and Social Justice. And we are a national organization that's committed to building a movement to end poverty. And we come out a long history of poor people's organizing for basic needs, whether that's housing, healthcare, some of the very things that Christ Lutheran Church has been doing for a very long time. And we work with networks of churches, congregations, grassroots organizations across the country, as well as these, kind of broader national coalitions to to hear how people are responding to the many things that are going on that aren't right, and then try to bring that together to form really long-term power. We draw on the lessons of history and our faith traditions and cultural practices that have always been at our disposal, to not only build power, but first of all, build community, and then from there, really try to change the direction that our society is going in, but together.
That's great. And what's the relationship with the Kairos Center and the Poor People's Campaign?
So the Kairos Center has a almost 20-25 year history, and about 10 years ago we've been, and I've been involved with the Kairos Center for nearly 20 years, somehow. I don't know how that happened, but
Right.
I remember us talking. The Poor People's Campaign was Reverend Martin Luther King's last
Right.
big campaign, where he's bringing together the issues of racism and poverty and militarism to connect actually a bunch of movements that were going on in the 60s, the late 60s. And we've drawn a lot of inspiration from that over decades of work. And I remember us talking about the 40th anniversary of the Poor People's
Mm.
Campaign, 1968, the 45th anniversary. And as we were headed towards the 50th anniversary of the historic campaign that Reverend Dr. King was involved in, we started to work very deliberately towards launching a big national campaign together, and found this partnership and developed this partnership with Repairs of the Breach, the Moral Mondays movement that was coming out of North Carolina, a very dynamic movement in the 2013, 2014, 2015. That was, we were finding each other moving in the same direction. And so the Kairos Center and the Moral Mondays movement, and then Repairs of the Breach, which is Reverend Barber's organization, we decided to join forces and launch this thing together. And so we're the co-national partner organization for the campaign. And yeah, we share a bunch of the work on the ground, the work at every level around policy, around culture, around organizing. And so it's one of the campaigns that we have built together with this, really important partnership over the past several years.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful because there's a lot of folks who may be listening and have no idea what any of these things are. Maybe they've
Right.
heard of the Poor People's Campaign, but they don't really know a whole lot. So I think that's really kind of helpful for folks. So I want to dive in a little bit into the report that I mentioned in the intro. It's called "A Matter of Survival." I have my own copy right here, and people can find it online, of course. And in this work, you share stories, strategies of what I would say are innovative ways that people are able to survive in the midst of terrible circumstances, right? What brought this project about? What was the inspiration for it? And why frame it as a matter of survival?
Yeah, so we started this project in 2022, 2023, as I mean, really beginning with the assessment that our society was moving really quickly past and through this really dramatic time in many of our lives that had upended our livelihoods, that had upended how we work and live, and kind of exist together, at a household level, at a community level, at a national level. And we were moving very quickly past that time without really absorbing the lessons, the adaptations, how we kind of met these great needs in our lives, anticipating that in many ways those needs would continue, but also maybe get worse,
Right.
or anticipating some of the times that we're facing now. And so, as the policy and research director of the Kairos Center, I recognize how important it is to be in touch with communities at kind of the front edges of these crises. And so, with the support of the rest of the organization, we started with a survey, segmenting parts of our network that we knew were on the front lines of the pandemic, and all the other things that were happening in 2020, 2021, and 2022. And out of that survey, we identified, a handful of organizations and individuals to have interviews with. That it really just kind of grew from there. We ended up talking to 40 different organizations across the country. When I say organizations, I mean churches,
Hmm.
different denominations, different houses of worship, community-based organizations, broader networks and coalitions. But really, wanted to ask, how did you adapt to this crisis, and what are the lessons and challenges and possibilities that maybe you're continuing to engage in today, that you both confronted and now we can learn from as we head into what we anticipate maybe even more difficult times, as hard as that is to imagine.
Yeah.
And out of these kind of stories of resilience and creativity, we also articulated this model, which of course you mentioned, this project of survival model that comes out of, actually has a long history in poor people's organizing, where how do you kind of meet the needs that people have, especially those living on the margins, especially those for whom, government programs and other social systems just don't work. And how do we meet these needs and also build power through them so we can change those systems. So this model, we saw elements of this model through these interviews, through this research, and so we kind of reframed it, revisited it for these times. And the matter of survival, the title, both comes from a leader in the welfare rights movement, which probably people aren't all that familiar with. It was one
Sure.
of the most dynamic movements of the 60s and 70s, and actually the welfare rights organizing was one of the biggest membership organizations of the long kind of civil rights era. Had tens of thousands of members across the country, dues paying members
Hmm.
who were caregivers and welfare recipients, and one of their earliest leaders was Johnny Tillman. And she said that, for poor women of color, for poor caregivers, this kind of organizing is a matter of survival.
Wow.
And so we drew on that history to kind of both honor it, but also draw on its lessons for today, where again, the collapse of these programs that tens of millions of people rely on is how we address those gaps that will grow in this period is a matter of survival. And through that, can we actually be building something new and different to sustain us and change the direction that we're headed in?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I wish I had known that a few hours earlier, because I actually preached. I had quoted a little piece from a matter of survival in my sermon today, and one of the things that I talked about was that it's not just survival, especially when it's linked with justice and love and all those type of things. It's sacred survival. And that's a lot of the sense that I hear you talking about. And it's also a form of resistance
Absolutely.
as well, in a great way of that. So a lot of and I have a background in politics, and so oftentimes it's like a first language for me. I don't know if that's good or bad, but it is what it is.
It is what it is.
But often I think in terms of narratives.
Yeah.
And what I really sense in this report is a moral narrative that challenges the kind of the dominant political narrative that's out there about policy and about poverty in the U.S. What's your hope, or what have you seen as far as how this has had an impact on that?
Well, I really appreciate this question. And yes, this does go beyond kind of the political framework of, whether we call it left or right,
Right.
kind of frameworks or narratives. And really what we're talking about, and we say this all the time in the Poor People's Campaign, is this isn't a matter of left or right, it's a matter of right or wrong. And that I think has a deep resonance with many of our faith traditions, with many of our moral values, and just what we know is true. And in both the research and then kind of talking to people about the findings of this report, what we're realizing is in just about every community, people are doing this kind of work. People are doing the day-to-day care that we all need to provide for our children, provide for our elders, make sure that we have safe transportation to and from school. Like these are, one of the lessons I learned years ago after the 2008 financial crisis, actually from a community in West Virginia, was that, people, when we go through hard times, the lessons that they shared with us is we know what to do. We plant another row in
Mm,
the garden,
yeah.
and that natural abundance gets shared across the community with across whomever needs it. So if everyone was doing that,
Yeah.
what abundance could we create together? But it's also embedded in the culture of a society that has seen hard times
Right.
and knows what it takes to kind of survive through that and then keep going. And so what we found in talking about the lessons of this research and this model of project survival today is one, people are already doing this work in so many ways. Two, it kind of goes under the radar. And so it's not seen as
Mm.
political work. It's not
Right.
seen as even work that should be political or politicized. And yet, in my understanding of what I would say is political work, it doesn't have to do with a party.
Hmm.
What it has to do with is asserting our inherent humanity and dignity through this kind of work. If the systems we have aren't working for us, we're not just going to sit back and remain hungry. We're going to figure out what it's going to take to feed ourselves.
Right.
And this is deeply political work. It's an
Right.
assertion of our fundamental dignity, of our sacred, of the divine nature in all of us. And so sometimes we tend towards splitting those apart, but in fact, in a system that doesn't acknowledge that in us, when we do that, that is a form of resistance. And so I think the task that we have as people of faith and conscience, who know that we deserve the fullness of what life has to offer. Our responsibility is to both see, this dynamic work that's going on, to understand its core in these values that transcend political party or whatever kind of affiliation we may have, and then through that, can we be building community and build, encourage that community to stand up in other ways. One of the models that we've been sharing and draw from a lot, actually, is of the Underground Railroad,
Mm.
which, if nothing else, this was a system of politicized care,
Right.
material care that was provided, that was created by, the first of created by enslaved people freeing themselves, and then kind of building up these roots towards freedom and freedom and liberation, and along the way creating the opportunities for people to come in and provide whatever it is that need to be provided for along that path. And so what does that look like today under these conditions? It will be different, but the need is so great, and the hands are many, and so it's a question of
Right.
putting this together.
Yeah, a lot of times that just reminds me of kind of the original Greek meaning of politics,
Yes.
right? The polis, the group of people. It's about how power is utilized, how decisions are made, and it's about the common good. All that type of stuff has to do with what politics is, and versus what happens. And I've talked about this a lot, is the difference between politics and partisanship. So often I'll hear colleagues who will preach a sermon about justice, and maybe they'll get complaints from people in their congregation, and they'll say, "Oh, you're being too political." And what they really mean oftentimes are, I hear that through a partisan lens. And the reality is God is political, and there is a politics to morality, and there is a politics to being in community and all that type of stuff. And I think that's really important, because politics in and of itself is neither good nor bad. It's a neutral thing. And it's not, and we have this lens that, oh, politics is always this terrible. No, it's a necessary part of life. Right. I
Yeah.
mean, as long as we're going to have that a society, a social contract of some sort, we're going to do politics.
This is
And the
yes.
question is, are we going to do it well and in a healthy way, or are we going to do it in an unhealthy way, in a toxic way that's harmful? Which kind of gets me into the next question I want to ask you, which has to do with this word survival.
Yeah.
You've been talking about it, and I'm curious, if and maybe I didn't give you this question ahead of time, so but it came to me of, has the definition of survival shifted over time,
Mm.
at least in the American context, or in a larger context? Would you say, how has it shifted, which I suspect it has, but how may that have shifted? And maybe where have you seen that?
Yeah, so I don't I think it's one way to answer that question would be to look at who is really fighting for survival right
Mm,
now. What does that mean? And I would say, we are living in a time um, where we can produce more food than
right,
we produce enough food to feed the whole world many times over. We could create housing
right.
really in a matter of hours with this amazing technology. We have in terms of technology, we have the means to actually, respond to this climate threat,
Hmm.
um, and not contribute to it.
Right,
We have the means to do all of these things, and yet we haven't we haven't done that.
right.
And so again, this raises the question of politics. What keeps us from actually realizing the kingdom of heaven on earth?
Yeah,
From being able to ensure these basic needs are met, not just for our generation, but for the ones that follow. And when we look at in this country, is without who is kind of without enough food, without adequate housing, without enough of an income to be able to provide these things, without clean water, we're talking about a massive population of people. In
right,
our imagination, sometimes it's a small population, um, maybe a few, thousand in our community, maybe a few 100,000 across the state, maybe a few million across the country. But in fact, according to some of the research that I've done, we're talking about 40% of the country whose needs on a day-to-day basis are uncertainly
yeah,
met. And
yeah,
that's 140 million people.
yeah.
140 million people across every race, in every region, in every state, in every county.
Right,
And so these are just massive numbers of people who, in fact, um, aren't having their needs met. And this becomes a question of survival when we know that poverty is the fourth leading cause of death in this country, fourth leading cause in the richest country in the world,
right.
and during the most productive era of human history. Poverty is the fourth leading cause of death in the United States of America. And that is just
And
unacceptable.
of course, we won't find that on anybody's death certificate, right?
No, no,
Because but we'll see all the effects of poverty,
we will see all the
right? Poor health, or again, homelessness doesn't show up on the death certificate. But my gosh, like I know people who
yes,
have lived homeless for years, and they die because you're not humans aren't meant to live like that for very long, right? There's
yes,
a reason why, hundreds of, thousands of years ago or whatever it was, when we were small little tribes and living outside and all that, that the average age was, younger than me, by far, right? Um,
right.
yeah. So this is, yeah. And 140 million. I just want people to take that in. I've heard that statistic before, and it's such a huge number that it almost feels unrealistic. It almost feels comical in a way of like, oh, what? I mean, can people even envision, like, if we took the population of the United States, 140 million. I mean, if you took everybody in the state of Pennsylvania, what is there, like 12 million, something like that, 11 million people in Pennsylvania? How many people in New York? How many in Virginia? Like, we're looking at a good portion of the East Coast, where there's the majority of the population is east of the Mississippi. There's a huge segment of that. If we were just counting raw numbers of entire states.
I could tell you in just a few
Yeah,
seconds
yeah,
how many
yeah.
people in Pennsylvania. And so the numbers, these poverty numbers are they often have to be averaged over five
Sure.
years. It's a
Right.
little bit wonky, because especially because from the pandemic era on, because it was harder to kind of reach people and get the numbers. But over the past number of years, when we average out the numbers, we're talking about in Pennsylvania there are approximately 4.2 million poor and low income people, which is just about a third of the population of the
Right.
entire state of Pennsylvania.
Right.
And that's a much broader population than we tend to think.
And that's and
Yes.
that's if it's accurate. Like I've
Right.
done
This is
I
probably an underestimate.
exactly right. I've done
Yes.
the point in time counts before
Yes.
where, like I think there's a reason why those occur at night in January when it's cold and freezing, because we're not going to find everybody. It's almost on purpose because if we found everybody, my gosh, we're underfunded to deal with it. And that means we're going to have to devote more resources to actually dealing with this.
That's right.
So, let's do this on a cold day in January when it's likely that you're not going to find everybody. And then their numbers look not as bad as what the reality actually is. And if you find people, well, good luck. It's not like people are like, "Oh yeah, I'm over here." That, people are just trying to survive and whatnot. So yeah, it's an absolutely huge thing, and I appreciate, and I have said this before, same thing that you're saying. It's mind-boggling to me that the world's richest country in history has a poverty problem. That we've got we've got more than enough resources, like you were saying, to take care of all this stuff, and yet what are we
And yet
doing?
we don't. And yet we don't.
We
And so
don't.
at this point, when we talk about survival, when
Yeah.
we talk about this kind of really widespread, and then if we think about over a lifespan,
Yeah.
sociologists have done this research that look at our lifespans in this country, and it's something like three-quarters of the population will experience poverty at some point in their lives
Sure.
living in this country. And so I think, if it's not us, it's definitely a family member or many family members who hasn't had someone, crash in their home,
Right.
on their couch for whether it's a week or a few months or several years. I just know in like our personal experience, that's happened quite often,
Yeah.
and so if it's not one person directly, it's definitely someone within our very close circles. When you're talking about in Pennsylvania, let's say one out of every three people, that's not that far from our day-to-day
Right.
reality.
Right.
And yet it gets hidden. And we don't talk about it because there's this shame associated around being poor as if we're the failures. When
Right.
in fact, you know, an economy and a political system that 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 allows for 40% of its population, a third of its voters,
Right.
to exist in this kind of precarity. That's not up to any one individual to fix. This is a systemic problem,
Yeah.
that allows for these two polarities. You can have this, massive wealth on one side, trillions of
Right.
dollars,
Right.
and then this widespread poverty and economic insecurity on the other.
I think part of the challenge is that you've got people who are in the middle class who I think if they were honest, they would be honest about being afraid of that this could be them.
Yes,
And it doesn't take much either. Lose your job, and how many people have enough
this is right.
not only to go for 3 months, like whatever the recommended is of, you got to have enough money for 3 months to pay this, that, but even a month. There are a lot of folks who have a pretty decent income that are just getting by because
That's right.
of the cost of things.
That's right.
I mean, like I live in Cumberland County, which is just outside of Harrisburg. It's on the other side of the Susquehanna River. It's the fastest growing county in Pennsylvania. And the housing, I I remember having conversation. The same house in Cumberland County costs $40,000 more than in Dauphin County, which is literally on the other side of the river. $40,000 difference for the same size, same kind of setting. We're not talking about dramatic changes or anything. And there's plenty of this, like there's these $500,000 homes going up, which I'm like, where are people getting this kind of money? It's insane. But where is the affordable housing? That's what we need. But then again, like you said, there's the stigma, there's this shame, there's all this type of stuff, and I think a lot of it, there is this kind of fear of I don't want, it's too close to me. I remember in my previous call, we would go to the truck stop, and because people are living in their cars at the truck stop and all this, and I remember meeting a father and a son, and the son, I don't know exactly how old he was, but he was not like a little child. He was older. And the father told us this story. He's like, I would like to work. I was working when all this happened, and something happened that he wasn't able to work anymore. Right. And this guy had it all. He had the house, he had the boat, his job, he was working on like on sports cars, on NASCAR cars,
Yeah.
like doing like really like this guy is smart. He's able to he
Hmm.
was able to do all this stuff. Married, had, the white picket fences, the dog, and all this type of stuff. And then like a country music song, it all just fell apart.
Yeah.
And everything completely because he's never been cleared to go back to work. Like he literally, no doctor is going to sign him off. And so, like this whole argument of, oh, they should just get a job. He literally can't. And he wants to, but he can't. And so, like this kind of speaks to this of this isn't all about, there's that common thing of, oh, they should work harder and that type of thing. Well, I know plenty of people who survival is a full-time job
Exactly.
and they're trying, and that if we had to do more, then the poorest would be the wealthiest given how much effort they put into survival.
It's so true. I mean, the people underestimate just how much work people are doing day to day, but also how much work it takes
Yeah.
to care for a family member
Right.
who is experiencing long COVID and cannot work anymore,
Yeah.
or who, lost their disability and, can't, or is working and on disability and has had their hours cut. I mean, when we talk about this population of 140 million people, it's about 40 million people who live below what they call the poverty threshold,
Right.
which is so low. It's like $19,000 for an individual. I
Oof.
mean, $30,000 for a family of four. This is nothing. This is
Right.
nothing.
Right.
Um, but so it's about 40 million people who are living under that threshold, and then 100 million people who are living right above it.
Right.
So really, any emergency, we're talking about a car accident,
Right.
a healthcare crisis, an eviction notice, not even for you, maybe for a family member that then
Right.
pushes that just stretches your household income, your household finances beyond what it can manage. Anything, and then you are under that threshold. And so it's a very precarious situation that people that again 40% of the country is living in, and that we don't talk enough about.
And it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when
It's
with
a
all
matter
of
of
those
when.
things. I mean,
Yes.
I knew a family that the thing that kept them down was funerals of family members. I mean, like, what do you do? You got to bury a family member, and that's not inexpensive.
No, it's
Uh,
thousands and thousands of
right.
dollars.
It's crazy, right? And that's not anything that you can control. It's just here's a family member that died, and somebody's
Well,
got to
you
do
may
this.
appreciate this, Reverend Matt, but there are these, one of the early things that the Kairos Center did when we were first forming more than 20 years ago was we worked with a homeless-led organization here in New York City
Mm.
that one of their members died, or they hadn't been in touch with one of their members. They found out he died. They went to go find him and prepare him for
Yeah.
burial as best as they could, and they found out he had been buried in what's called a potter's field,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
in kind of an anonymous grave for poor people who
Yeah.
they didn't really try to find family members, they didn't try to find community members. And it started this practice where we would bring faith leaders and faith communities to the Potter's Field to pray for everyone who
Yep.
hadn't had someone kind of offer them those last rites, which, in all of our traditions are so important,
Right.
to honor the lives that we've lived. And during the pandemic, I know that Potter's Field was very active.
I bet.
I mean, these are still things that are ongoing in so many places. Again, invisible to most of
Right.
us, yet very much present,
Yeah.
um, in our communities.
Yeah. So let's shift a little bit now that like half an hour just went like that. It's this is what always happens in
Yeah.
these conversations. So let's talk about some practical things that people can do. And I think this is really important to bring it from this kind of abstract discussion, and especially like this big number again, 140 million feels just insurmountable. right? I mean, we can't even visualize what 100 million people is. So I want to bring it down to a practical level. Leave the 140 million, keep them in your prayers, but leave that aside for a minute. Bring it down to this personal level, so we don't feel overwhelmed. So many people are just struggling to keep their head above water. We've talked about that economically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, all sorts of way. The last part of this report uh, talks about it offers 5 things that people can do, and I just want to talk about these a little bit with you. So there's contextualizing projects of survival within a framework of abundance. That's a mouthful, first of
Yeah.
all. There's centering leadership of the poor and most impacted. There's prioritizing political education. There's believing in human decency and goodness. Yay. And using art and culture strategically. We don't have time to go into all of those
Yeah.
type of things. So maybe just pick one of those
Yeah.
that you think would be really helpful for people to get a sense of what does this mean? Give people some hope.
So, I mean, to bring it down to to our community level, I mean, I think at its very core, I think kind of the first one, operating from a place of abundance rather than scarcity. That's the basic core of what that's trying to say, right? So
Yeah.
that what that means is that believing and kind of acting out in our day-to-day practice, through meeting people's needs, that there is enough for us all.
Hmm.
And then creating the possibility of that abundance in our activities. So let me give you some concrete examples of that. Um, One of the stories that we heard from was from Tennessee, out of the Reverend Ingrid. I believe she's a Methodist pastor, and she was volunteering at a homeless encampment, by the river, in Nashville. And there was a flood, and she was kind of overcome with, what are we going to do with these hundreds of people now who've lost
Yeah.
everything? And what she was operating from a place of scarcity, which is natural. There's a crisis. She's thinking about what she herself and a small group of volunteers can do. And then she remembered this parable of the 5,000.
Mm.
And she remembered the feeding of the 5,000. And what she remembered was a kid who brought the loaves and fishes
Yep.
to, to share. And as she's kind of thinking about that parable in her context, she's like, well, that was just one person who brought what
Right.
they had. What if everyone brought what they had, including
Mhm.
the people from the river who
Yep.
were displaced? They all had things that they brought with them. So,
Hmm.
like the abundance being, what do people have to bring? And what can we do together? So, not just think about her as a volunteer and what her small group of volunteers can bring, but the broader community that we are building. Everyone has a gift or a talent or some hard, material, something that they are bringing to the space and the community we're building together. Let's think about that abundance. Let's think about that operate from a framework of abundance and create the space for everyone to be able to bring those gifts. Don't separate it off into an us and them, but
Yeah.
a we. What do we bring when we are together? Um, and another example I can share that I think about this a lot was from a community in Ohio, Nelsonville, Ohio, kind of the Appalachian part of Ohio. And this was, an after school program. Volunteer noticed that some of the kids didn't want to go home, after
Mm.
school. And so, there may be lots of reasons for that. And so they decided to do a spaghetti dinner for a handful of kids, for 12 kids. And that spaghetti dinner, within a matter of weeks turned into a community dinner for
Mm.
literally hundreds of people.
Wow.
And Dottie, who was a volunteer we talked to, said she didn't know week to week how they were going to feed all the people who were coming there.
Yep.
But things would happen. A friend whose company had a lunch said, we have all this extra dessert and salad. Can you all use it? And they said, sure. Or people would come early to hang out and then put the menu together and start cooking. So even the physical capacity of feeding everyone, the space became big enough to include everyone, and then somehow all those needs were met. And what was kind of amazing is it went from meeting these needs on a very regular basis. Every week they did these dinners. Every week was a miracle. To then it was this community when, there was a city council proposal to move their polling station from one part of town to another part of town, which would have affected this community the most. These were the
Yeah.
poorest residents of the community. And this community talked about it at the dinner. And they said, we're not going to let that happen. It was this community that pushed back against that polling station being moved, and they protected their political rights to participate in democracy. But it began literally by bringing people together around dinner. And so when we operate from that point of abundance, we unlock all kinds of possibility that we may not even know exists.
That's beautiful. And it reminds me, I've said this in a Christian context. We'll often talk about the idea of Jesus ate his way through the Gospels, right? And that's where the miracles happen. That's like there's always around food. It
Yes.
seems like, and as Lutherans, we're really big on like food is a big is a big thing. So I can definitely appreciate that. I want to shift a little bit to politics. That dangerous topic that no one's supposed to talk about, which is why we're in the predicament we're in. Uh,
Yes.
because we got to have healthy conversations about this type of stuff. So we talked a little bit about the difference between politics and partisanship before. And one of the things that I really appreciate about what y'all are doing at the Kairos Center is that it's not attached to a political party. It's not attached to, like, oh, this has got to happen in order for us to have any success and all that. In many ways, you're doing things regardless of what's going on in the professional political realm. We'll call it that, and the partisan type of thing. I want to talk about, I want to just ask you, why has this been so important for the Kairos Center? And how would you say to help shift people from having a central identity, which is what I think we have in a lot of cases, a central identity attached to a political party, to a sense of what I hear you talking about, a sense of community, a sense of togetherness, a sense of identity that's not attached to a political in a professional political sense, but in a political in that more organic, original sense of the meaning.
I mean, I think first of all, we used to have those kind of conversations, I feel like all the time growing up.
Yeah,
I feel like we used to we used to be able to be in kind of mixed, political company, let's say, with a greater amount of, I don't know, ease. And just recognizing that's possible, that has been, so it can be again, I think is important. And I think for the history that the Kairos Center coming out of poor people's organizing, this political independence was really important alongside financial independence, kind of not being tied to any one thing that could kind of manipulate, a fragile or kind of precarious community towards one end or the other without actually meeting our needs. And so it became really important to kind of maintain that political independence to make sure that our needs were going to get met, you know.
yeah,
And so that's part of it. And recognizing that, and not in a cynical way, but just like in a historical
right,
way,
right,
that politics is kind of dirty business, and
yeah,
it takes what it can of people, and it uses them to their own ends, to its own ends, and then and discards people. And that is not the community we want to have. We want a community where we can all thrive. And so being able to look beyond the electoral cycle, being able to look beyond, the problems we're talking about, whether it's the decline of, jobs that pay enough that we can live, the kind of hollowing out of our social welfare systems and programs and our healthcare system. These are long-term problems, that have been decades in the making across political party,
right, right.
and so it's going to take perhaps, more than one electoral cycle, more definitely, it may take decades to correct course. And so we can't attach our our energies to a certain political party at any place along the road, if we're going to keep that long-term vision.
It reminds me of something that I learned a long time ago, and I've said this where, I think one of the challenges that we face, and that's become more and more, is a lot of people look to a capital for the answers, whether that's Washington, D.C., or whatever the state capital is in different places. People are looking there, assuming that those folks have the answers
Right.
to questions when the reality is they don't. Either because they're so removed from the situation of going on with the people that they're supposed to represent, or it's never been their life. It's never been any of that. And like I worked for a member of Congress. I worked for a state representative, and one of the biggest lessons that I remember learning is these people are no more special than anyone else. They put
That's
their
right.
pants on the same way. They have mental health challenges. They have other type of health challenges. They don't have special knowledge. They don't have, the special wisdom and all this type of stuff. Yes, there's some of them that are really wonderful and try to do the best they can as far as trying to care for folks, but they don't have the answers. And oftentimes they're making it up as they go along. And I again, I think this is a scary concept for folks because they're like, what? The people in charge don't know what's going on? No, they don't know what's going on. They don't know what to do about it, and they have just as much fear as everybody else. So what I hear you saying
Yeah,
is start with the people around you.
that's right.
And right. And a lot of this has to do with take responsibility that, to stop saying someone else is going to solve this because there ain't no one out there doing it for everybody else. Right.
Or isn't. No, and it really is up to us.
Right.
One of the most compelling phrases I've heard that describes is nothing about us without us is for
Mm.
us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nothing about us without us is for us. And
Right.
so for that to be the case, we have to know we know best the needs that need to be met. And I think the other thing that's happened is this pretty deep isolation and fear.
Yeah. Right.
There's what you call it, like it doesn't quite make sense, but we were talking a little bit earlier as more and more people have experienced this economic precarity, living on the edge of poverty. There's also this isolation that's come
Right.
alongside. Rather than the kind of coming together, we've become more and more isolated. And so, really, starting at a very fundamental level, I know so many organizations that are pulling back actually from their political advocacy work at a state level to build at a community level because they recognize this is where we have to be strongest,
Yeah.
is at our community because it's our community that's going to help us withstand whatever comes next. And from there, then that's the base where we can build long-term political power
Yeah.
from.
So I'm going to ask you about this bill that just got
Yes.
signed into law literally like 2 days ago. The so-called big beautiful bill. There's so many words that could describe it, and I wouldn't use those words at all.
No.
But yeah, we only got like 12 minutes, so but I didn't want to make this the main focus of it either. And of course, there's lots of estimates as far as the impact of people losing Medicaid, of the SNAP cuts, and all of these type of things, of all these folks who are going to be impacted in very direct ways. And that's not counting the numerous other folks who are going to be impacted in indirect ways.
That's yes.
Um, I want to go beyond just even the bill,
Sure.
to you know this, and this isn't anything new. I feel like we're in the second Gilded Age of America. And for people who are listening, what's the Gilded Age? The Gilded Age was the last few decades of the 1800s, and it was the time of the robber barons, who were really clamping down on the labor movement. I mean, like they would bring in not just strike breakers, but they would bring in militia. They would hire their own militia and kill workers, and they would like do whatever they wanted for the monopoly that they had. And then there was this is the time of the Know Nothing party, which was anti-immigrant and anti certain religious groups and all this type of stuff. And there was this concern for wealth and all this type of stuff. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we're going through the same thing. And this bill didn't start this for the second Gilded Age, but it feels like almost a legislative official start.
Yeah.
It's legislated greed is the way that
Yes.
I have described it. And so I think people are just, reeling from, wow, this happened, to now we're going to have to kind of figure out what to do in
Yeah.
response. I know we're here at the church and the clinics. Uh, we don't receive any type of state or federal money, but the people who had received some of that money, they're going to go after the same grant money that we've been going after. And people who have been cut from, who are going to be cut from Medicaid or SNAP, they're going to come through our doors. And that's not going to come with any increased funding or donations or anything like that. We're going to figure out some way to help this increased need. So I'm just wondering, are there any initial thoughts or what's going on with the Kairos Center and this? I'm not looking for you to offer the answer or anything like that, but has there been some thought as far as given all the stuff that we've been talking about, this
Yeah.
sense of community, of really kind of digging into that and really investing in local words of wisdom, maybe is what I'm looking for, in how folks are going to go forward.
I mean, gosh, it is very worrisome. And I think the analogy you've made to the Gilded Age is exactly right. I would like to hear more actually at some point of your, assessment of that and lessons from that era. It sounds like you've really studied that history. Because, some of what you pulled out is what we will see. Right? This is a $4 trillion giveaway to those who
Right,
already have. And the only way that that's possible is also by spending a bunch of money on systems of violence, on
right.
war, on incarceration, on policing. So we're going to see that too. Um, and whenever that happens, I think we're also going to see kind of this emboldened community vigilantism,
Mm,
and these other threats that we've started to see where people, you know, are pulled into their corners. And we're going to have to fight really hard. We're going to struggle really hard to prevent this kind of breaking apart within our communities.
yeah.
And that's going to be really it's going to be really difficult. And yet I think so. If I can just step back a second,
Hmm.
Kairos is actually a Greek term
Hmm.
for time. So
Right.
there's chronological time, which kind of continues uninterrupted, chronos, and
Hmm.
then there's Kairos, which is a break in time, and it's a time of crisis.
Yeah.
It's a time of deep crisis, but that through the crisis there also brings opportunity.
Yep.
And so it's hard to see what the opportunities are in a
Right.
time like this. But the crisis and opportunity, the opportunities don't come without the crisis, and the crisis don't come without opportunities. So, what are the opportunities that we can imagine and learn from? And so, I go back again to some of these lessons from the pandemic. And one of the models that I just keep in the forefront of my mind comes from a church in East Harlem. It was the People's Church that, as it was going through, they realized they couldn't on their own meet all the needs of their congregation, and they were talking to other faith leaders who also couldn't meet that need. And what they decided was five churches, just in one part of East Harlem. It's not a big geographic area. These five churches decided they would operate as one church with five sites.
Mm.
And so each minister only had to preach once every 5 weeks. They turned the volunteer capacity, the building capacity, all the infrastructure capacity they had was suddenly freed up for many,
Yeah.
many days, for weeks at a time to meet different needs. And this one church of People's Harlem, the People's Church in East Harlem, they decided to use their expanded capacity to become one of the largest emergency food providers in that neighborhood. They were all
Wow.
over the place. And Reverend Dorlamar, who was leading that effort at that church, she described it as living the parables of Jesus out every day.
Mm.
They just something was broken open during that crisis where they rethought how church was done. And
Yeah.
it was dynamic. It was in community. It involved a lot of the community members taking on these faith responsibilities, and it didn't last beyond that period. But it's a mod. I think we're going to have to enter into a period where even within the institutions that we have and that we rely on every day, we're going to have to build new relationships with each other,
Yep.
and that will be where some of this new possibility unfolds.
Yeah, when you're talking about that, it's reminding me of a couple of things. One is, you know what we entered after we got through the Gilded Age. Do you know what the next age was by historical standards?
Was it the Great Depression?
It was the Progressive Era.
The Progressive Era. Okay.
So when you're talking about that, the
Yes.
chaos and the disaster and then the opportunity, I've already heard this with several people talking about, the progressive era wouldn't have happened without the Gilded Age.
Yes.
And so whatever is going on now, it's going to lead to something that will bring about some kind of reform that will sway us in a different direction, that type of thing. I mean, that's my hope. The other thing is coming from a Christian perspective. I've talked about this, the idea of like, we proclaim life, death, and resurrection, right? And so you got to go through death in order to get to resurrection. And why that's essential is because the resurrection part, we're not in control. Um, we try to be in control, and it don't work. The resurrection part is not a rewind either. It's
That's right.
going forward. Something has died, and what happened is no longer, and there's something new,
Yeah.
and it's usually better. Is the idea with that. All right, so we're coming up on the end here. There's a million things that we could talk about, Shailly. I really appreciate you coming on. How can people find out more about the Kairos Center? How can they find a matter of survival?
Right.
Yeah, how can they do that?
Yes, so you can find us online. We are on all the social media sites, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, etc. And it's Kairos, Kairos Center, CENTER.org. That's our website. And then KAIROSCENTERNYC is where you can find us at all the different social media sites, and that's where we stay updated on a bunch of things. That's where we have our resources, a matter of survival, and other reports, including we do have a new book coming out. We actually have two publications. One is a set of lessons from this history of poor people's organizing. It's a new book by Reverend Dr. Liz Theo-Harris, our director, and our colleague Noam Sandweiss-Back, called "You Only Get What You're Organized to Take." It's just lesson upon lesson that we can be learning from for this era.
And
And then
I'm reading that right now. I'm
okay,
literally reading it right now, and it's a great book. Highly recommend it for folks to get. So yeah, go ahead.
that one. And then we have a new one called "We Pray Freedom," which is actually a set of rituals, prayers, things we do for mourning, for joy, for remembering our loved ones, remembering fallen fighters in our struggles for justice, and so much more. And so this is a compilation of rituals and practices that come out of these decades of organizing. It's not out yet, but I think it's up for pre-sale. It's called "We Pray Freedom," so check that out as well.
Perfect. I did see the preview of
Yeah.
that, and I was like, "Ooh, I need to get that." So, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on, and this has been a fabulous conversation. I think it deals with reality, and it also, what you all are doing is providing some hope, or at least maybe highlighting the hope that already exists in that. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah.